Excellent. So like I said, hi everyone, welcome to Missing Middle's first Housing 101 on accessory dwelling units. My name is Grace Thomas with the Missing Middle Housing Campaign. For those of you who aren't familiar with Missing Middle Omaha, we are a grassroots campaign focused on removing barriers to all different types of housing, anything in between detached single family to apartment buildings. We really want to support a wide variety of abundant housing here in Omaha. And this is just one of the campaigns that we run as an organization, specifically around ADUs, but we also support things like transit-oriented development and just general improvements to the zoning code here in Omaha. So today, want to talk about accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units have a lot of different names. They go by granny flats, carriage homes, jockey houses, and exurban, specifically here in Omaha. But what they are is a second dwelling unit located on the same lot as the primary dwelling unit that can either be detached or attached to the unit. So they look a lot of different ways. I think kind of typically when people think about ADUs, they think about garages that are converted into these second dwelling units, but they can also exist within the home as well. They can be a basement unit that's converted. Fonzie from Happy Days lived in an attic conversion that was an ADU. So they come in lots of different shapes and sizes, but the idea is that you can live within this unit. It has a bathroom. In Omaha, it has to have a stove in order to qualify as an ADU. And it exists on the same property as an already existing home. So that's our definition. Here are some kind of cool examples. These are all photos from AARP's ABCs of ADUs. The one on the left is a garage ADU. So they took that garage and put a unit up on top. You can see that access point on the stairs to the left of the home there. And then on the right, there's a photo of an attached ADU, which is basically like a build out or an expansion of the already existing home. Missing Middle thinks that ADUs are important for a couple of different reasons. The first is that there are several indicators in Omaha that suggest that we're experiencing a housing crisis. In 2021, there were 3,000 real estate agents in Omaha with less than 300 homes on the market. And an analysis by the Sherwood Foundation found that 37% of Omaha is housing cost burdened. We have a large gap of affordable units that we need to fill here locally. And ADUs are oftentimes affordable in neighboring cities that we have good data on just because they're smaller, right? They're a smaller option for folks, but they exist in residential neighborhoods, whereas apartment buildings might just exist in the urban core. This data suggests that ADUs are affordable to households earning 60% of area median income, and affordable means you're spending 30% or less of your income per year on housing. ADUs are also great because in neighborhoods where they're allowed, they help the primary homeowner earn an income with the rent that comes from that property if that person decides they want to rent their ADU out, or they can just be offered rent-free to friends, family in need. There are lots of great stories of folks with aging parents that want to keep them close but want to have their own space. These are a great option for those folks. There's also really good data to suggest that adding an ADU can add home value. It can increase your home value, and that makes sense because you're basically increasing the amount of property that you have. And they're super popular in the US right now. ADUs are having a moment, we like to say, growing at about 9% per year, maybe more recently due to the pandemic. But they're also being legalized pretty widely nationwide and in lots of great cities. Louisville in Kentucky just had a huge push to legalize these last year, and that's been really successful for them. So we're seeing a lot of momentum around these kind of smaller home options nationwide. AARP is a huge supporter of ADUs. A lot of the photos that we pull from are from AARP, and that's because they allow folks in many cases to age in place. If you live in a residential neighborhood and you're, aging out of taking care of a large home, you don't want to climb upstairs anymore, the lawn is too much maintenance, but you've lived in that neighborhood your whole life. Oftentimes there aren't really any options for you to be able to age in the same neighborhood that you've known forever. And these are a great way to be able to do that for folks. Something that AARP also highlights is that we're building lots and lots of big houses, but smaller houses are really what is needed here in the US. The size of families is shrinking, but the size of homes per person is increasing pretty exponentially. Asking the question, can we afford as a society to buy, rent, or heat, or cool, or care for such large homes? So just the idea of giving options to folks in addition to, these large homes. And then I always like to pull this diagram from the Heartland 2050 Vision Report. They looked at a breakdown of housing types in Omaha at the time of this report, which I think was in 2014. And at the time of the report, about 70% of units in Omaha were large lot single family. And if nothing were to change in Omaha by 2050, that would increase to 81% of homes being large lot single family. When they looked at the demographic breakdown of the city, small lot single family homes are really what's needed. Different options like ADUs, like townhomes, like duplexes. We just really have a gap where those are badly needed in our city today. And then this is super hot, fresh off the press. The Congress for New Urbanism completed a code audit for AARP. That was actually just finalized today. They made 8 recommendations for how Omaha City Code can be more friendly to the aging community. And their second recommendation is to permit accessory dwelling units by right and fine-tune current standards in Omaha. So experts even outside of Omaha are saying that this is a good idea, in addition to the really supportive coalition of folks that we have encouraging these buildings here locally. Always like to highlight existing examples here in Omaha. We know that these exist, but we're grandfathered into the zoning code, which means when the zoning code changed in the 70s, these were already in place. So they kind of just got, passed in and allowed. The one on the left here at 60th and Pine is an old jockey house. These are more common around Exarban, which I think is a really cool, unique feature of Omaha. And then at 20th and S, a really nice carriage home in the back. These are 2 other examples. On the right here, you can even see that there's a driveway that services the ADU in the back. There's also a second set of staircases. Both of these kind of fit in the carriage home style. ADUs have gotten some great press in Omaha in the past year or so. There's this really lovely piece done about mother-in-law staying in a mother-in-law suite in Exarban area. Being able to stay near family, but kind of have her own space. So where these exist in Omaha, where they were grandfathered in and allowed, they're really beloved and appreciated by folks that have access to them. And then I was lucky enough to meet a family in Dundee that has a converted carriage house. It's currently being rented to a UNMC dental student who is just looking for something small, close to campus. Dundee is actually walkable for her, which is great. It includes a bathroom, kitchenette, seating area, and it's actually in a part of Dundee today that would not be allowed to build this same unit. Bing in the chat asked, are these examples you are showing approved? We believe that they were approved based on the age of the home. So if the age of the home is, it looks like it's pre-1970, then it was probably grandfathered in. We don't have a really great list of which have technically been approved past that. And that's one of the great benefits and parts of legalizing these in the city is we would actually be able to track where ADUs exist, where they've been permitted to create, and follow up and see if they're, good solutions for those folks. Okay, so that's my really quick 10-minute spiel on why ADUs are important and why they're really cool places to live. And now I'm gonna take a little bit more of a deep dive into the zoning of these homes in Omaha today. And I'll preface this by saying that I am not a city employee. I am not, I didn't go to college to read zoning codes. I'm just a huge nerd that has talked to a lot of people in the planning department about these for a long time. So if you have specific questions that I am unable to answer, I will get you the answer. I will help you find out. But this code is by design very confusing, very multi-layered. And I'm going to do my best to explain why this code is not appropriate for Omaha and why we should come together and advocate for a change. Okay, so there are really three possibilities for a homeowner to build an ADU in Omaha. There's the red area, which is most of the city, the green area, which are these little small specific lots, and then the blue area, which is zoned for TOD. And I'm going to start off by talking about this red area. So by far, the vast majority of the city would have to go through this process if they wanted to build an ADU. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is check to see the zoning of your current plot of land that you want to build this on. If you are located in zoning, which is in that red area, it requires that 50% of the residents around you sign a petition for you to be able to create a zoning district to build this ADU. So that's my property today. I live at the 30th and Center area. If I wanted to build an ADU, I've got to knock on all my neighbors' doors, right? Within, it depends on what the unit looks like, but about a block radius, and I have to get 50% of them to sign on for me to build this unit. That in and of itself takes hours and hours and hours to track down your neighbors, knock on their door at the time when they are, going to be home, catch them, pitch this idea to them, ask them to invite you in, explain to you why this is important, try to convince them that this doesn't mean that, college kids are going to be partying in your backyard until all hours of the night. This is a huge barrier for folks. And really, this is where a lot of ADUs start and stop in Omaha, is people just can't get 50% of their neighbors to sign on. And it's what's required in most of the city. Once you have talked to your neighbors and seen if this is even feasible, the next step would be to contact the planning department and set up a pre-application meeting, which is optional but definitely recommended, where planners from different divisions will give you guidance about next steps. Once they have, you've talked to them through what your property is going to look like with the ADU, how the ADU is going to be designed. The next thing that you have to do is actually go out and physically get those petitions from residents. And then you have to hire an architect to make a site plan. It has to fit a long list of regulations. You have to have 2 off-street parking spaces. It can only be 750 square feet maximum. It has to fit within the correct percentage of impervious pavements, a pretty long list of criteria. Once you have that site plan and your petition, you actually submit that to city council. So you've got to go to a city council meeting on a Tuesday, make sure that all of your counselors have looked at your design for your 750 square foot home, and ask them to pass an ordinance permitting accessory apartments within that designated area. Once that's complete, you also have to obtain an accessory apartment permit from Permits and Inspectors Division, primary to the occupancy of the apartment. So all in all, this process costs hundreds of dollars. It takes hundreds of hours, if I'm being truthful. We have a couple of volunteers who have functionally tried to go through this process, and they get maybe 20 hours in and just decide that it's not feasible for them. And in a lot of cases requires a pretty similar amount of oversight as building small apartment complexes. Like, this is really involved for a type of unit like this, especially in Omaha. Okay, so let's say you are not in this red area, but you're in one of these special green areas that are kind of just sprinkled throughout the city. How do you find out if you're in one of these green areas? Is a great idea, great question. These green areas are permitted in R5 through R8 zoning districts. The minimum lot area has to be 8,000 square feet and the width has to be 60 feet. So if you qualify for that, you can have a detached ADU. You can't have an internal ADU. So the second dwelling unit has to be located to the rear of the site and shall be separated from the front dwelling unit by a minimum of 25 feet. You don't have to go through the process of petitioning all of your neighbors. You do have to go and get a permit for this, but this is a little bit easier. Actually, in this case, I think that one of the big barriers is figuring out if your lot qualifies or not, right? And then similar to if you live in the red area, there's a whole laundry list of qualifications the unit has to meet. It has to have a minimum of 2 parking spaces, can't be larger than 750 square feet. You have to live in the primary unit for at least 9 months out of the year. And the list kind of goes on and on, if I'm being honest. So that's this green area, accessory apartments. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the questions. Wanted to ask, what if you have an existing structure that could serve as an ADU? Would you still need permission from residents? If you live in this red area, yes. Even if you have a garage or your basement is outfitted with a bathroom and the exits that you need, in order to get the permit to build an ADU, you still have to go to all of your residents and get them to sign on in order to get a permit. Even if really what makes it an ADU or not is if you're adding a stove. So if I wanted to add a stove to my basement, it already has a bathroom, it fits, several of the criteria. That's the other thing, is that property that you want to change also has to fit this design criteria, is what it's called. In order to be able to put that stove in legally, have it recognized as an ADU, you still have to go around to all of those neighbors. Okay. Finally, we're going to talk about this blue area. This is a new zoning code that was passed in 2020 called transit-oriented development. And this was passed in order to try to encourage more ADUs to be constructed along Dodge. The process for this is a bit simpler in that you don't have to get that 50% of neighbors to sign on to your process. You set up a pre-application meeting, again, optional, but definitely recommended. And then you have to submit an application to the planning department to make sure that your home is fitting all of the regulations outlined in the TOD district section of the code. You then have to submit an application to the planning department to rezone your property to DOD, and you have to apply for a conditional use permit for the accessory dwelling unit. They'll go together to the planning board, but only the rezoning is forwarded to city council. So it's slightly more streamlined. You don't need that petition. It does have to go through planning board and city council. So this takes a minimum of 2.5 to 3 months from the time the application is submitted. I also wanted to throw up here the ADU requirements, because this is where Missing Middle thinks that there are several ways that this code can be improved. So today, if you want to build an ADU, and it doesn't matter if it's in TOD, if it's an accessory apartment, or if it's just in a general, lot in the city, you can only have 1 ADU per lot, constructed on permanent frost protected foundation, compliant with all relevant building, electrical, mechanical codes. That all makes sense, right? We want homes to be built well and to be safe for people. That's really important. Here are a couple of areas that we think the code can be improved. So right now the code requires a maximum square footage cannot exceed 50% of the primary unit, or 750 square feet, whichever is smaller. What we'd like to have the code say is, if you lived in a home like mine that's 1,700 square feet, you would be able to take half of that, and it could be between 750 or 850 square feet. That couple extra 100 square feet makes a really big difference for folks, and is proportional to the size of your home. So small changes like that can make a big difference. Attached and detached limited to 1 bedroom. This is something else that could really easily be changed for a lot of people. This makes sense if you have, say, 2 relatives that you want to live in your ADU. Additionally, parking, combined ADU and PDU must provide a minimum of 2 off-street parking spaces. That doesn't take into account what is on street. And this regulation, having to, extend or build a second driveway is a really big deal for a lot of people, and why some folks, can't move ahead with this. Either the ADU or the PD must be owner occupied. That's something else that we would really like to see changed. We have a volunteer who owned a home that he actually rented to his brother. And when his mother grew ill, they wanted to build an ADU on the property for his mother to be able to be close to his brother. And this, was illegal according to the code. He wasn't able to sell his home to his brother. So because he wasn't living in the primary unit, he wasn't allowed to build it. So it's a combination of the design requirements that are pretty egregious. I'll kind of talk about nationally, what the standards are in terms of design requirements. And then it's also the process is just really expensive, really long, takes a lot of time and money in order to complete. And for that reason is inaccessible to the vast majority of Omaha. AARP outlines rules that discourage ADUs, and Omaha checks every single box. They're only allowed in certain geographic areas. Off-street parking requirements are large. We have complex design criteria and approval steps, and there are specific regulations that don't apply to the primary unit for sure. So a couple of weeks ago, hopefully this is how some of you found out about us, a group of neighborhood associations here in Omaha submitted a letter to the director of city planning, the city council, and the mayor, and requested that ADUs be legalized throughout Omaha by right, and that some of these design standards that make it really difficult to build these locally be removed. So we did a really big push. We had hundreds of folks write their city council representative. If you haven't written a personal email to them, it's definitely not too late. We know as a grassroots organization that is by far and away one of the most effective ways to get politicians interested and making these changes. Writing a personal letter about why this is important to you, to whoever your city council person makes a huge difference. That's all I got. Really pretty short 25-minute presentation here. Hopefully the little that I do know about the zoning code was helpful to you all. And I'd love to hear any questions that you have, what benefits you see in regards to ADUs, any concerns that you have, and what would be helpful. If you're a person who's thinking about building one of these, I'd love to talk to you more. When we send this series of letters out to the planning department, city council, and the mayor, Director Fanslaw went on the news and basically said, I'm not going to legalize these throughout Omaha until folks in TOD go through that process. He believes that is a greatly simplified process, and I think we would argue that it's still pretty complicated and still a lot of changes that could really easily be removed to help make these more accessible to folks. But that is potentially one route, is to see how it goes to approve one of these. They haven't had any permitted applications yet. I would argue in part because it is so complicated still, but that is something that was their response to our outreach, more or less. All right. Joseph asked, what are the design standards? When you look at this list of ADU requirements, this is kind of the start of that list, which is, the square footage, limiting to 1 bedroom, internal limited to 2 bedrooms, the height, additional entrance requirements. That's something that you would have to talk to the city about. Yeah, additional design regulations. That's a good question. I don't have the full list in front of me, and it also depends on if you want to build an internal or an external ADU. So that's why step number 2 and step number 3, reaching out to the planning department, is important if you're really serious about building one of these. Let me read through the comments. Andrew mentioned in his comment, he's interested in the financing of ADUs. That's something that I, to be honest, don't know a whole lot about. I know that they're not necessarily super cheap to build in Omaha. And the frame of reference that I have is I have two folks that kind of sat down and crunched the numbers, and they believe it would cost between $150,000 and $200,000 just with the designs that they have. And I'm not totally sure how that works to get financed to build one of these, go through like a loan approval process, but I'd definitely be interested in knowing more if anyone has any information on that. Any other questions from folks?
This is Clyde. Senator Wayne has been working at the state level to have missing middle housing legislation at the state level to kind of make it easier. Is there still anything that needs to be done at the state level to accelerate the use of ADUs and so forth?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure I managed to get a slide in about it, but so Senator Wayne's bill, LB 866, which was the, some people called it the Missing Middle Housing Act. It basically gave cities two options. One is to change your zoning code to allow for missing middle housing throughout the city, or to create an affordable housing action plan. Omaha City Council voted to do the second of those two options. And you might have heard that the city is going to have listening sessions in May, with RDG, who was hired to go through that process. So it is possible that if all of us came out to these affordable housing listening sessions and said, one of the things that we want to see is ADUs allowed by right, that could be an avenue for changes to be made. The complicated part about the affordable housing action plans is that they have to be implemented. And the act doesn't necessarily say that cities have to approve or implement the plan. They just have to make the plan. And in other states, this is where state legislature can fall short sometimes, is that these plans are created and then just kind of sit on the shelf, or maybe are selectively implemented. So that's definitely a concern that we have, is that we want the, if, ADUs are added to that affordable housing plan, for them to be, enacted. I would say on the state level, there are certainly some states more liberal than Nebraska that have approved these at a state level, which makes the process really easy for cities like Omaha. But I also think there's other, things that we can do at a state level, whereas zoning on a local level is kind of what's more typically done nationally. Does that answer your question, Clyde?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Bing asked, is Omaha's ADU ordinance up to date at the same level as those in California or Boulder? Definitely not. Yeah, I was actually just at a conference last week in Portland, and really along the coast, ADUs are allowed very liberally, and people are able to build really, really cool things on their property. In Portland, actually, they're advocating, and I think they just passed, that you can actually sell an ADU separately from a primary home, which means if you wanted to, you could just sell the back half of your property, and that is really an entryway into home ownership for lots of folks. The city of San Jose, California, if you ever want to read about the gold standard of ADU policy in the US, it's probably San Jose. They have a day a month where you can go in and get your ADU permitted in an hour. That really expedites the process because planners are just focused on one type of housing for that day. And it makes it really easy and straightforward in order to pass these through. Currently appears similar to other permitted new work. What makes this special to enable is permitting process. Leland, could you say more about your comment?
Yeah, hi Grace. We traded a few emails on planning processes a couple of weeks ago, just as a reminder. Yeah, what I'm interested in, there's always two sides of every coin. Every time you go through a permitting process, of course, you've got the applicant and their goals, and but you also have to worry about the protection of the neighbors. And why this process is so special. It needs to be different than any other home improvement. So if I had a non-conforming house or a conforming house and I wanted to put a third story on, why would I not want to say I want to be through the ADU process versus a normal permitting process and cut some time and costs off my schedule? I guess what I'm looking for is what makes this a unique thing to require a change in the process for permitting. A lot of people fight this 2.5, 3 months process, and it's endless, and every community has their way of approaching
going on
it.
right now, you know, about the
All takes
missing
a lot of
middle
time.
housing. Like, how are we going to get people housing?
Oh, sorry about that, Leland. Yeah, if I'm understanding what you're saying, it sounds like you're saying ADUs might not be that different than adding like an addition to your house, but the process is so much longer. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I'm actually saying that why should an ADU process be shorter if compared to adding to a house? I mean, it's, you know, is it really just, and this is true not in Omaha, but across the country, is there's really an issue in the length of the planning process, particularly given the internet. But there's really an issue in how long it takes to permit anything.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And yeah, listen, like at Missing Middle, we definitely think that abundant housing comes from making it you know, more time efficient and a little cheaper in order to permit and build units. So I would say the opinion of the campaign is that these changes, you know, we're starting with the literal smallest type of home possible, but that it should apply to other types of changes as well. And I also think that the code, it makes sense to me that the code would fit the builder, right? So in this case, the builder is designed for, or should be designed for the homeowner, like the average person. And for them to have to go through a 2 to 3 month process, we obviously want it to be a safe home, you know, for it to meet, you know, safety standards. But it's just a, yeah, really long, egregious process, very similar to lots of other permitting processes in Omaha.
Yeah, it is. I guess that's kind of my hang up a little bit, is that you know, today when something's permitted, let's say you wanted to add a 2-car garage, which is not too different in your backyard than maybe adding an ADU, right? You go through the permitting process. It takes anywhere from 2 to 4 months just to get the gears turned. And yeah, you got to have drawings. You got to check the drainage. You got to make sure you don't change the infrastructure around you. You know, how do you ensure that a homeowner going down and building? I mean, we're still going to want some sort of professional construction code of conduct.
Yeah.
Taking place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think someone else asked, does Missing Middle believe that there should be actual design standards or just that it should be left to the planning department's discretion? And we believe that there should be design standards. I just think that there are certain obvious ones recommended by AARP, nationally recommended, that by removing, we can make these more accessible to folks.
And I think you have a good point. So for instance, in California, and I think it's actually San Jose or San Diego, I forget which one, they actually have pre-published design standards down to the building.
Yeah.
And so that's what bypasses the approval process, is that the planning department's reviewed a certain design and said, if you build it this way, we don't have to do anything. And that just cuts out all the process time. And you can go out and bid for a contract. And that's kind of cool. But I don't know in the Midwest that that's been done very often.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing here, right? Is that you need to have a certain capacity of people who are interested in building these, that it makes sense to allocate city resources for them. But you're also not going to have anyone interested if you've made the process so complicated for people to get through that it's not attainable for them. I mean, and yeah, to your point, Leland, in California, you know, there are companies that have sprouted up that will, you know, design and build. That's all they do, is really design these homes. And because of that, they've been able to make them more affordable than having a one-off home builder creating these, maybe for that home builder, it's 10% of what they build.
Okay, yeah, appreciate it. Good conversation. Thanks for broadening the horizon on it.
Yeah, I really appreciate your feedback. And I think too, it seems reasonable to expect that Omaha will land somewhere in between, right? Like we would love to see all these changes happen. And today, Omaha doesn't allow for almost all of these. And hopefully where we'll land is somewhere in between that's agreeable to, having a safe and secure process for folks, making sure that the ADU fits in the style of the neighborhood, but is also accessible to folks. Joseph asked, are you aware of the Incremental Development Alliance, IDA? I am not. I would love to know more though. And then Dr. Chen asked, what are your thoughts on the Lincoln ADU ordinance? I have not read the Lincoln ADU ordinance. Do you know it, Dr. Chen? Do you want to describe it in brief?
I haven't read them in a while. They came out maybe 3-4 years ago. And the Lincoln ordinance, from what I could see when I read them, were pretty liberal. There was no actual maximum size you could have for their ADU. I think it's somewhat similarly worded to the one in Boulder, Colorado. And so some communities have very strict conditions for them. Others are less restrictive. And as I recall, Lincoln's was pretty impressive. I was surprised when I saw this. And so I started questioning, when is it going to come to Omaha? Why are we so far behind? I actually started looking at ADUs about a decade ago when we were looking for the next solar project at our research facility. And then we settled on the idea of an ADA compliant sustainable small house project. And so the building we wanted to design, we're working with the School of Gerontology to make certain that it's ADA compatible. That means, for instance, you open our sliding glass door with one finger. There are very few sliding glass doors manufactured in this country that are ADA compliant like that. We wanted the most energy efficient windows that are available, because we really wanted to be able to heat our building with basically 16 birthday candles. So we were trying to, for obvious reasons with Molly Ringwald, we wanted to really test and showcase new design principles that we could apply. And we really felt that to meet the 2050 standards, most buildings, we have, I think, a challenge in affordability versus being obsolete when built, because we really do have a serious global warming crisis. And I think if we really want to meet 2050 energy standards, this is going to be a challenge to also be affordable. And so how we're going to solve that solution, I don't know. This first building is right now at Metro Community College, and we're going to be moving it in probably the early June to UNO to prove you can move it. And when you no longer need it, you can sell it. And so that's the whole idea of the exercise that we are currently involved in. I think that the efforts that you're undertaking, Grace, are very commendable. Thank you for organizing this, because as in all grassroots efforts, it's going to take people like you and the people attending this to make this a reality. And so I watched over a period of 6-7 years the struggles in California, and I started reading articles about people just building an ADU in a let's say a subdivision which didn't allow it. And I remember reading one letter. The owner said, "Sue me. I have to take care of my aging parents." and I'm not going to put them in a nursing home, in essence. And I thought, wow, people are beginning to take the law into their own hands because they're driven by desperation to find a different solution for their aging parents. And so I watched the struggle going on in California for half a decade, and then I saw, gee, the last time I checked was 3 years ago, and I remember being shocked that basically I could not find a community in California without an ADU ordinance in it. So I said, wow, this has really swept the entire state of California. So I think therein lies solutions that that you and your other mates can use as a model. I don't know who those leaders are, but I know Lincoln has an ADU ordinance, and you can, if you like, I can see if I can dig it out and send it to you, so you could have.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I'd love to read what's going on in the state. And yeah, so many great points there, Dr. Chen. I'll just say quickly, Louisville, I sent a link in the chat, but they're a very similar, type of city to Omaha, and approved ADUs last year with really great success. And then, yeah, I got, like I said, I went to this conference in Portland last week, and there were so many folks from coastal cities that looked a lot like Omaha is looking now 10 or 15 years ago, and that they were kind of just on the cusp of this, huge housing crisis. And the homelessness crisis that they face now, the, just exponential increase in property. They were really excited to meet someone from a city in the Midwest and say, you all have a shot at doing something about this while you still have time, while your city is still, in that growth phase. So yeah, a lot of that really resonates with me. Joseph is putting a ton of really great articles from Strongtown in the chat. And Joseph, you also asked, is the city supportive or encouraging to small scale developers? That's a really great question. And this is just my opinion. I think that's a huge gap that we could fill, especially because in Omaha, it is so hard to build medium-sized properties. How a lot of smaller developers get started is they buy a property and they convert it into a duplex or a triplex and, rent out those units. And that's kind of what gets them started. But in Omaha, because of the way the zoning code is, it takes about as much effort for a developer of that size to build an apartment complex significantly larger. There are just so many, zoning code changes and hoops that you have to jump through.
That article from that I posted, the first one on it has 5 parts to it. If you go to that website, you can find all these. They're free to read. Takes you through 5 stories about small developers, and the whole ADU thing comes up, and it's really very difficult. I'm sure it's not any different in Omaha and these other cities that people just run into just bureaucracy, and the one thing will contradict something else. And it seems like Omaha's codes really need to be fixed, and I don't think Omaha is friendly towards small developers. I think they're really into these big developers, and they're letting the big developers do whatever they want.
Absolutely.
And it's really a shame.
Yeah,
because it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, good development doesn't have to be any development,
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, there's a world of opportunity that exists in the middle that we're not taking advantage of. I wanted to know, in case anyone is interested, there are going to be a series of listening sessions, like I mentioned. I'll put a form in the chat if you want a calendar reminder or some information ahead of time. We really want folks to attend these and basically say what you just said, Joseph, which was really well said. There are so many ways that we could improve our zoning code here in Omaha. We haven't had a real overview or redo of our master plan since the 90s. It's over 25 years old.
They don't follow the master plan. They just turn their back on it. They turn their back on the design guidelines too, and it's destroying neighborhoods. I'm sorry to say that. They can
Yeah.
accomplish all the things they're accomplishing and do it better, and they just won't do it, you know?
Mhm.
I think there's one of those articles talks about how to go about becoming, you know, involved in these things, and it's a really good article that someone wrote from a city council somewhere. It's anonymous because I guess they didn't want to, you know, say who they were, and they go through the steps of how to really get involved and avoid the arguments, which I have a hard time avoiding, and being really proactive and reaching out to people and making small changes, you know, small changes that start to build to become the big changes. And I think everybody should read those articles. I try to read as many as I can, and they're really enlightening. And it's such a different approach to what you see happening in Omaha.
Yeah. Absolutely. What about the metro in place of Omaha? What are other Omaha metro cities doing? What does that question mean, Lynn?
Oh, you know, a lot of people refer to metro as east of 72nd of Omaha. Other people refer to metro as anything including Gretna or Richmond, Richfield, and Blair. And so I was curious if you had any update on what some of the other surrounding cities might be doing as well. Papillion, La Vista. You know, this is an issue, a metro issue, not necessarily just Omaha city limits issue, or even an Omaha zoning jurisdiction issue.
Yeah, that's a good question. I will admit that that's an opportunity for improvement for the campaign. We kind of felt like we had to set a boundary somewhere, so we really just focused on the metro. But I mean, one of the great examples that people love to talk about is the Prairie Queens development, which is, I don't even know what city that's in, but that's an example of where that developer wanted to build it in Omaha, but the, you know, code was just not, really prevented it from being created. So that developer went outside the city.
I know Minneapolis got a lot of good press. Trying to find where I saw this. They eliminated, where is that at? I think it was single family zoning completely.
Yeah, exclusionary zoning.
It really opened things up, but then it also pointed out a lot of problems and contradictions that you know, ran into, but it was a good step.
Yeah, Minneapolis is a great example. And at this conference I attended, a lot of folks were saying that they're an example of abundant housing really working as a solution to affordable housing. So they have some good data that the cost of a unit in the past 5 years, I think, hasn't increased at the same rate that other cities have seen, even as their population increases. And that's because they've continued to build more housing, as they know that more people are planning to move there. Legalizing missing middle, legalizing things like ADUs, that's all definitely contributed to their success. Although not without, yeah, as Joseph said, faults and opportunities for improvement, certainly. Okay. I think with that, I'm going to put my personal email in the chat. If anyone ever wants to volunteer with Missing Middle, we're going to be at farmers markets this summer. We love writing blog posts, putting them on social media, outreach campaigns like the one we just had. There are lots of ways to get involved, and would definitely love to have you at our next monthly meeting. That's a all hands-on meeting on when will that be? It'll probably be May 2nd or May 4th. But that's really when we get organized on this grassroots effort. This is a bottom-up campaign. You know, all hands on deck are definitely appreciated. So thanks everyone for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
I have my email in the chat in case you want to get a hold of me, and enjoy the rest of your week.